So now it is my pleasure to introduce our next topic for the day, which is broader social and cultural outcomes. Puawai Kake, Director, Kohu Strategy and Planning, is going to come to the stage along with Rebecca Pokura Ward, the Principal Specialist of Environment and Sustainability at Waka Kotahi, and Craig Mitchell, Deputy Director, New Zealand Upgrade Programme from Waka Kotahi. Please welcome them all to the stage. And just a reminder, you can submit your questions via the app and we'll run through those afterwards.
Cool. Tēnā rā tātou katoa, tuatahi tēnei te mihi ki a koutou ngā mana whenua. O tēnei rohe o tēnei wāhi o tāmaki makaurau. Ki a koe e Miriama, tēnei te mihi anō, ki a koe o tira ki a tātou katoa, tēnā koutou. My name's Puawai Kake, he uri ahau no Te Rōrua me Ngāpuhi, he uri anō no Ingarani me Kotirana. So I hail from the not so winterless north at the moment, and it's a privilege to be here today to talk about what broader and social cultural outcomes might mean. That's my thing. Thank you. So again, a bit of a organic presentation, I think, but just a bit of a background with respect to who I am. So a resource management practitioner, small business owner, focusing on bringing in more Te Ao Māori perspectives in particular into the planning and infrastructure space. What broader and social and cultural outcomes might mean, and how we can potentially give effect to those. So the first thing that really comes to my mind is actually, what is sustainability? What do we mean by sustainable development? What does sustainable growth look like? And within Te Ao Māori, there's not one word that would define what that means. We see a lot of these kupu Māori becoming more and more prevalent, in particular in policy and legislation. And so in my perspective and the way I've been taught, and it is from those kaumātua, those kuia and those iwi and hapu representatives that I've been privileged to work alongside, who have helped shape that worldview in terms of what it means. But I won't turn this into a Te Reo Māori lesson. Point being, it is very different and it is diverse and it is dependent on the environment and the context that we are working within today. So the importance of names, the importance of terms, the importance of kupu Māori, there's a reason why this particular place, Eden Park, is referred as Ngā Anawai, the watery caves. Some of these key issues I don't think will be too unfamiliar to many in the room, in particular with respect to climate change and adaptation planning. We're dealing with the crises at the moment. Coastal and river erosion is huge. We're dealing with the aftermath still in Te Tai Tokerau and parts of Auckland as well. Lots of flooding everywhere. I think just a few days ago I was almost blocked in. Again, just because we're in a flood-prone zone, because that's where they decided to build particular houses. But at the other end of the spectrum, we often deal with droughts and fires as well. This often in turn reducing our biodiversity and ecosystems in particular parts of our environment. Again, a really big issue is funding and finance for Māori. That finance is often reliant on council and crown agencies and the willingness to support our aspirations and our objectives. The historical underinvestment in infrastructure is a really big issue, in particular in Te Tai Tokerau, as we grapple with what the effects of recent events have been. There's always going to be competing priorities. The priorities of Māori are often left at the bottom of the barrel. And the importance of intangible cultural assets, and I mean cultural infrastructure and what those landscapes for mana whenua in particular look like. The intangible values associated with those landscapes is often not necessarily understood, and being able to monetize or put a financial number or figure against that is near impossible sometimes, and that often affects insurance. One of the really big themes that we did here, and this is just in relation to a few projects I've been involved with lately, is governance and decision making. There are numerous unresolved grievances. There are very different worldviews, and I'll touch on that very briefly. In particular, of relevance to this is the Te Ao Māori worldview and a Westminster worldview introduced through colonisation. Again, that impacts on our representation at the top table, and that again in turn impacts on the roles and responsibilities and who is it that is representing who at the top table. This slide's a little bit gone wrong. It's actually not like that at all. And that's probably just my real amateur approach to try and put too many things in one slide. So another example, just really briefly on this one, because we're going through the process at the moment of implementing Te Mana o Te Wai into Tai Tokiro with the Northland Regional Council. And so on the left-hand side of that column, it's supposed to say whakapapa pūrākau, and that kōrero tuku iho informing our tikanga and our kawa, which in turn allows our mana and our rangatiratanga to be acknowledged and practiced at the top table. That enables and allows our kaitiaki to monitor and be able to understand the environment based on the tohu or the indicators that they're familiar with. On the other side of the column, again, it's really difficult to see, but hopefully those in the room will understand how legislation is drafted in New Zealand. And I will get a proper slide for you guys so you can see this in a better state. But this Western worldview was imposed on Māori, so tikanga Māori was our first law. It was our customary law. It was the way in which it governed our values and our principles and the way in which we act. The RMA now really dictates the way in which resources are managed, and we have seen through the draft NBA, the Natural Built Environment Act, proposed, how they are trying to bring that to fruition a little bit more. So we use the example of the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management as an example of a framework that really is trying to bring those two worldviews together, and that is through the principles that are up there and what they mean. I'll let you guys go and Google search. But the importance of te mana me te mauri o te wai, and what the hierarchy of obligations are with respect to that needs to be determined by mana whenua. That needs to be informed by their values, and it needs to be informed by the way in which they uphold that mana, te mana o te wai. This is just I suppose a reminder, and one I think not too many will be unfamiliar with again in the room. And it's really just to highlight some of the recent events, but also some not so recent events. So the top left image is a photo of Otiria marae, and those familiar with Kawakawa o Mwerewa will know that this marae in particular is in a flood-prone zone, and actually it's about 10 or so years ago when that flooding happened and impacted on that marae. The other two being in Dargaville, and the result of the February floods having quite detrimental effects on these cultural assets, these important wāhi tapu for our tangata whenua. And the Wairoa River, if those familiar with Dargaville will understand how that raised really significantly and impacted on that township of Dargaville. And we're still dealing with the aftermath here in Auckland as well. So this is the last slide, and hopefully a little bit thought-provoking. What do we do for change? Again, these are some of the recommendations that emerged through some of the kōrero that we had with iwi and hapu leaders in Te Tai Tokiro. Those community outcomes with respect to climate change need to be led by those communities. That needs to be led by mana whenua as well. We need to empower mana whenua, enable them to be the ones that are leading the change, allow them to make the decisions, but working in partnership with those agencies as well. The importance of mātauranga and Western science working together. There's some really good examples where we actually do bring those worldviews together as well. But first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that tikanga Māori informing our mātauranga, our knowledge. That requires collaboration and key communication between parties. supporting the koru economy, that's in reference to the circular economy, and that capacity and capability building, I think some of our mana whenua reps spoke about as well. People often forget that mana whenua are dealing with multiple projects. Your project is 1 out of 40. We need to make sure that we can give them the space and the place to allow them, to enable them to be actively involved. The importance of new technology. Technology is changing so rapidly. What role does ChatGPT have in this space? I don't know. But the importance of intellectual property rights, those property rights and that information remains the property of mana whenua. Information protocols, data sovereignty, those things are really key and really prominent in any project, and we need to remind ourselves that it's not information that we hold, it's information that's been gifted to us through trust and relationships as well. Last but not least, the importance of our rangatahi, our taiohi and our youth, our younger generations, our kids, their grandkids, those children and those to come will be the ones that are dealing with the ramifications of the decisions that many of us are tasked with making today. So that let's not leave it to them to deal with some of the potentially devastating decisions that we may be making. But how can we bring some of these younger people into these conversations as well, in particular with respect to climate change and sustainability too. And that's just a cheeky photo of our kukupa that I just wanted to share because we often do forget with respect to our role within this world. We are here to look after this environment. We are here for a short amount of time. We need to make sure that we can uphold and bring that well-being of our environment to the forefront of every decision that we make. But I will pass it over to Craig now, and I think we're going to take questions at the end. So, kia ora tātou.
Should we stand up? Do you want to stand up? Oh, right. You're good.
Kia ora everyone. Firstly, thank you for that. Ko Craig Mitchell, Taku Inua. My name's Craig Mitchell. I'm the Deputy Program Director for the New Zealand Upgrade Program, working on behalf of Waka Kotahi, and lucky enough to be teaming up today with Rebecca. So I'll say a few things and then pass across to her, and we've also got our cheeky photo to go with the last cheeky photo up there. So what we want to talk to you about today briefly is how we've used one of the programs that we have with Waka Kotahi to really change how we're doing things and try and get on the journey of change. And so we'll come onto the program shortly, but just wanted to touch on some of the contextual challenges and opportunities that we have as we sort of thought about this program and how we use it to change. Again, but like one of your earlier slides, none of these will be a surprise to anyone, but they are hugely significant in terms of what we're doing. And I would note, while they're sort of under the banner of Decade of Change, I feel that the life of the program that we've been working on, which was 3 years, I feel like there's been a decade of change just in those 3 years, let alone the whole decade. So I probably don't need to explain the first one of those. Climate change just lives across everything that we do, and there's a lot in terms of what we're trying to do and tackle that, and it's covered in many other presentations through today. The second one is very much the outcome space we're working in now is vastly different from what we were dealing with in the past. So we're no longer talking about transport projects, but it's much beyond that in terms of what we're ultimately achieving in terms of outcomes, as well as how we go about achieving outcomes along the way. So it's a really different context for what we're looking at. And then the last one that I'll touch on briefly is around essentially the operating environment that we're working within. So as everybody in this room knows, the last 3 years have been, or 3.5 years have been wildly different from certainly any that most of us experienced in the past. Obviously directly in terms of COVID, what it's meant for well-being and health issues for people, but also things like the inflation environment that we have to operate in, the continuing changing dynamics of things like people and resources and immigration and those sorts of things. So it's just been a huge contextual challenge and opportunity in terms of what we're doing. I'll now sort of touch on briefly the program itself. So the New Zealand Upgrade Program, for those that are not familiar, is about an $8.7 billion program. across 10 years. So it is transport projects in the, I guess, the traditional sense, spread across the country, looking at things like outcomes around mode shift, around safety, around resilience. But it's a lot more than that. And again, I think investment is probably the key word rather than transport. It is an investment in a lot of different outcomes that we're trying to achieve on behalf of the government and ultimately the country itself. One of the things I sort of want to touch on with this program is not so much the program itself and the sort of specifics of it, but how Waka Kotahi has looked at using it to change how we do things, both internally and with our partners. And so really taking it as a vehicle for change. It's the right sort of scale, it's got scale, but it's also small enough that you can be nimble, and right from the very start it's been set up with an appetite and a mandate to do things a bit differently, both to tackle the changes which I've just sort of outlined, as well as ultimately getting those key outcomes. Probably the last thing I'll sort of touch on is while Waka Kotahi is seen that way in terms of the vehicle for change, as always with everything we do now, it's all about partnering. And so we sort of heard earlier about partnering with iwi, and so it's a big part of what we've been looking at here, and Rebecca will touch on that shortly as well. Also partnering with the likes of Kirail, so there's very much a joint program between us and them in terms of what we're delivering and learning a lot from each other along the way, and ultimately also partnering with the wider sector as well. So we can't do anything in isolation whatsoever. So we've very much sort of thought about that as we go forward. So that's sort of some contextual things around what the program is and what we're trying to achieve, but there's also an element of making it real and what we're actually sort of trying to achieve on the ground. And so without further ado, I'll pass over to Rebecca to touch on that.
Craig. So which button are you pushing? That big one. Yeah. I'm kind of amazed at the technology here, because you've got the big screen here and then we've got that little screen there to look at. So it's really helpful. But sort of as Craig touched on, really the NZUp program and a lot of the work that we do, we see it very much as a catalyst, or infrastructure as a catalyst to promote broader outcomes. So that outcomes beyond the physical infrastructure itself. It's outcomes that improve our environment. The focus around Māori business and tangata whenua, economic and employment uplift, and also working with our communities and celebrating the culture and identity of who we are. And we see infrastructure as a real catalyst to be able to do that. And I don't think we would have been having this conversation 10 years ago, but we really have moved up, we really have evolved into this space, and it's really important. It makes my job really exciting. That's why I get up in the morning and come to work. You get so much pride out of this, and it's just great looking at everyone here, because I sort of feel like we are a sustainability whānau. I've worked with so many of you, and it's just so good to be working together to make all this happen. So probably the first, area that we've framed sort of these broader outcomes around is around environment and sustainability. And one of the sort of the key shifts we had made was a couple of years ago when we adopted the ISC rating scheme or program for Waka Kotahi projects. And what that means is that sustainability is no more a nice to have, it becomes a must have, which means that every new project now over $100 million needs to achieve a sustainability rating. And many of you here are working with the rating scheme, but what it does is it drives, it measures, it recognises sustainability outcomes and good performance on its projects. So for us, it's mandating sustainability now. And the NZUp program has really taken that a step further, because not only do we just need to get a rating, we need to get an excellent rating. And I don't know if Jeff's still here. You said it needs to be leading, so I think we can aspire even further as we move further in this journey. So, that's a big step for us. Currently, we've got 15 projects that have signed up for the ISC rating, or signed up or undertaking the ISC rating currently, and that program is growing and growing. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we need all of you to help and support us in that. I guess one of the outcomes, or from having signed up to the ISC program, is how we're working in the carbon and waste reduction space. So I've named two projects there. One is the Takatimu North Link Digital Twin, which is I need to explain this, engineers in the room be able to help, but essentially it's a 3D model that identifies construction efficiencies on site, which includes identifying where where excavated material can be reused on site and thereby reducing the need to take material off the site and bring new material in. And so the Takatumu project actually won an international award for this because by using the digital twin, now I'm trying to get my maths here right, but it saved 22,000 truckloads of material on and off the site, which was equivalent of about a million kilometres saved of travel on local roads of trucks. It also, I think, achieved around 500 tonnes of saving of carbon reduction on that project. So it was a huge achievement that project team achieved. And there's some more information out on the stand there where I think it's on the video there. So, that's something we're really proud of. And the image that you see there, that's the Papakura to Druri project. And that's the bridge that's being was demolished across the southern motorway. And all the material on that bridge has been recycled and repurposed into GAP 65, I think it is. But anyway, it's able to be reused on the site and not trucked off or put into landfill. Again, another example of the innovation we're looking for in reducing our carbon emissions. In the Māori business and tangata whenua space, one of the key areas that we're doing is working with our tangata whenua and Māori partners to understand what partnership really looks like in developing strong partnerships. And Jeff and Adrian really talked about that in their kōrero. And it's, this is an area that we are growing in at Waka Kotahi. We know there's lots of room where we can do better, but again, I feel like we're getting there, and with the help with our mana whenua partners, I think hopefully we're getting better there. So I'm looking to you. I got the thumbs up from Jeff there, so kia ora, thank you, Jeff. In terms of some of the shifts that we're making on the NZ Up program, we have a 5% minimum spend now of contract value during the construction phase for Māori businesses. And the example we have there is we have the Takatumu project again, where we have Nehana Bennett. Now, he started off on Takatumu as a welder, as an employee on the project. The Takatumu project ran a pathways program, business mentoring pathways program. Nehana worked on that program. He's developed his own welding business, and he's now contracting back to Takatimu with his own welding company. So that's a really good example of how we're starting to make some really good steps in working with mana whenua and with training and developing business and coming back and working for us. So it's pretty cool. And probably community, and that's an area that's really close to my heart. We're part of our communities, whether it's through our construction workforces, our construction practices, and the assets that we leave behind long after we've gone. So it's really important that we become good neighbours, and we actually developed what's called a good neighbour policy as part of the NZ Up program. And that good neighbour policy is essentially about how can we, be respectful within the neighbourhoods that we're working in, how can we involve and how can we help and assist our communities outside the project boundaries, essentially. And the example there, you can see there on the top right, we got the local kindergarten kids to come onto site and name the crane. And after much deliberation, they ended up naming him, Crusher Gordon, so I guess it's a him. But the kids absolutely loved that, because what it did is it brought them out to site, they learned about engineering, they learned about construction, but also by gifting the name, they became part of the project and we became part of them. And the project team got a huge buzz out of it too. So it's a small step, but it had a big impact on that community. And the image below there, that was just after the cyclone down in Tauranga. And part of the Good Neighbour policy is about lending a helping hand outside the project boundaries. And what that meant was that after the cyclone, the team got out there, they mucked in, they used their skills, they used their equipment, they used their machinery to get out there and do their bit to help clean up and help the community, which is just another part of the Good Neighbour policy that we've implemented. And then finally, the image on the left there, that's of Old Mangere Bridge. And that project was completed last year. It's if you haven't seen it, it's sort of on your way back from the motorway connecting Onehunga to Mangere Township. And we see this very much as an example, a living example of what good looks like in a project generating those broader outcomes. We worked really closely with the community and with mana whenua to understand what was important to them in the design of the bridge. And what you see today is a reflection of that. It's much more than just a piece of steel and concrete getting from A to B. It's a destination, it's a community hub, somewhere where you can gather, you can fish, you can walk, talk, cycle safely. The memory of the old bridge has been preserved in a heritage garden where elements have been recycled and are there along with some locally sourced vegetation. We also work with mana whenua around helping clean up the health of the manukau. So mana whenua helped design a stormwater treatment system and a rain garden as well. So all of that is all part of the project, which if we'd done this maybe 10 years ago, we would never have had all of these additional outcomes that have come out of this infrastructure. So that's just an example, and it's great to be able to come back, I hope, in a few more years and be able to share more of this, because we're still very early on in the journey and we're just setting the foundations now. But maybe it's your turn.
I'll wrap up very quickly because there's an alarming red light in front of me. I'll take this about 10 seconds. So look, I think overall, thanks Rebecca. We're making progress, working with partners in space, but there's a heck of a lot more to be done and we need to move faster. So really, we're really interested to know how we can work with each other. There's a whole lot of knowledge and power in the room and beyond, so how do we harness all that to get going faster and better, basically. So wrap it up there.